Good afternoon and welcome to this evening's program. My name is Marisela and I am the Early Learning Coordinator here at the San Francisco Public Library, and we welcome you wherever you are tuning in today. Next slide, please. Please let us know if you enjoyed today's program or if you have any questions that may come up as the presenter presents. Library programs are made possible by the support of the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library, and we thank them for their support of this and every other library program that we have. And we invite you to come back to visit us at our virtual programming and check out virtual programming on the San Francisco Public Library's YouTube page. Next slide, please. I'm very excited to introduce today's presenter to you, and it is brought in partnership with us in partnership with Help Me Grow and the library. Help Me Grow is an agency that is a partnership between First Five of San Francisco, the Office of Early Care and Education, the Department of Children and Youth and their families, all dedicated to the well-being and growth of young children. Our special guest today is Zulema Baron, Developmental Screening Manager at Help Me Grow. For the past 12 years, Zulema has been working to improve and augment access to early screening. She was the program coordinator for the First Five California Special Needs Project with the objective of improving early identification and links to services to access developmental screenings and improve service utilization for children with disabilities and other special needs. She was integral in making sure that families received the help when they needed it. While working with early care childcare education providers in a variety of settings, such as childcare centers, family resource centers, and public health clinics, she has trained staff in the areas of developmental screening, early identification, and services. It's fun to know that Zulema is also an avid Disneyland fanatic and that she shares the same birthday as Walt Disney himself, and just a date that has just recently passed. So happy birthday, Zulema, belatedly. She also has a cat that rules her life, she says, and on weekends she enjoys spending time with her niece and nephew. For the parents tuning in today, you're in for a treat of learning a bit more about early screening and learning about a very useful app that may help you follow your children's development. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce Zulema Baron.
Thank you, Marisela, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here as well. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, you've already introduced me, so next slide. So today I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do with the time that we have together. So today we really want to make sure that anybody who's watching this will understand a little bit more about developmental screening, what it is, what are its benefits, and specifically using these questionnaires, the Ages and Stages Questionnaire 3rd edition, ASQ3, and the Ages and Stages Questionnaire Social Emotional 2nd edition, the ASQ SE2, specifically using those questionnaires as a way to learn more about your child's development. We also want to make sure that you have a good foundation of knowledge around what the ASQ and the ASQ SE can do and why we're using it here in San Francisco and really all over the country. And we also want you to get an idea of how you can access these questionnaires, either through this partnership that we're piloting right now in San Francisco with the Sparkler Play for Parenting app, or another way if you prefer more paper questionnaires. Next slide, please. So when we talk about developmental screening, a lot of times parents will ask me, what does that mean? What does a screening mean? What does a developmental screening look like? What does it do? And I usually like to compare it to when, for example, you go to your doctor's office, and they check your eyesight, they check your hearing, your vision, they monitor your weight, they check your blood pressure, right? They're just checking in to see if things are the way that they would expect it to see if there are any differences, any changes, right? They're not sure if there is a change. For example, maybe your blood pressure is a little bit high than the last time you came in, right? They're going to say, well, this is something different. They don't know what's happening, but they know that something is happening, and so they might want to check in and ask you some questions. Have you recently changed your diet, or what is going on? So that's what a screening is. It's basically just a brief check-in at that moment in time to see if everything is the way that we would expect it to see, or if there's anything that we need to maybe have more conversations about. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about developmental screening, what we're really focusing on is your child's development. Birth to 5 is such an important time, and I'm sure everybody has heard this by now, but those first 5 years are really the foundation for all of the learning and growing and the developmental milestones that are happening for your child. Next, please. And so we know that throughout childhood, children are using these or reaching these milestones. And these milestones are really how they're learning and how they're playing and how they're learning to talk and act. They can be, something small like the first time they smile, to something really big like the first time they take that first step, when they turn over. So there's all of these different milestones that children are reaching throughout their childhood, especially in those first 5 years. Next, please. But what we know as well is that even though there are these certain things that we're looking for all children, we know that children develop at their own pace. And so we want to make sure that we're honoring each child's individual development. Even within the same families, we know that children reach certain milestones at a different time than even their own siblings, right? Some children maybe start talking faster than their siblings, or walking faster, or every child is an individual. And so we want to make sure that we're checking in to really see how this specific child is reaching those milestones. Next, please. But it is important to know that milestones really do give us as parents and us as providers, a general idea of what to expect, what to look for when your children are reaching these milestones as they get older, as they continue on into the next age and stage of their development. And so we have a general idea of what to look for, and when to maybe see, okay, they might be missing some milestones, so that we can maybe put some supports together in place, maybe give you some ideas of how to support and continue to promote your child's development so that they can continue to reach those next milestones and that next stage in their development. So we really want to make sure that as we're doing screenings, that we're honoring each child's own individual pace, but that we're using milestones as a general idea to see if there's any need for more opportunities to practice some of these skills, or to learn more about the strengths or skills in progress, what they're learning, so that we can continue to support and promote each child's own unique development. Next, please. And so what screening is it should be really quick and easy. It should be a series of questions that are developed around that child's specific age and their stage of development. It's a way to identify if there are some missing milestones, to think about what other supports or other assessments we might need in order to learn more about why those milestones are missing. Children miss milestones for a lot of reasons that don't really signify, developmental delays or special needs. But sometimes children miss milestones because of, lack of opportunity to practice those skills, or maybe they're just focusing on one area a little bit more than another. And so we just have to really figure out what's happening, and so that we can continue to promote your child's development. And so it's a way to really identify those areas that support could be helpful or beneficial. And what is really important to know is that a screening is not a diagnosis. It's really not going to tell us if there are special needs or if there are developmental delays. It's really just going to let us know what your child's strengths are in their development at this moment. What are those skills in progress, what they're just about to learn or what they're starting to learn, and whether or not there are some areas of opportunity to practice some skills or to put some supports in place. So it's not going to diagnose anything. It's just going to give us a really good idea of where your child is today in their developmental milestones. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that we're really going to talk about 2 questionnaires that are going to help us really get a good sense of your child's whole development. And the first one that we're going to focus on is the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, 3rd edition, the ASQ3. Next slide, please. Next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the features of the ASQ3. So the ASQ3 has 6 questions in 5 areas of your child's development. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail over those 5 areas of development that we're going to be asking those 6 questions about. Next, please. So the way that you, as a parent or as a caregiver, as a family member, the way that we ask you to answer those questions in those areas of development are, yes, this is a skill that I've seen my child do all the time, no problem. Sometimes, which is, this is something that they're just learning, so it's not consistent enough to be a yes. It's, they're just learning it, so out of the 10 times that they try it, maybe they accomplish it 4 times, 5 times, right? It's there, I see it, but it's not consistent. So it's sometimes. And then not yet, which is, this is a skill that I haven't seen my child do yet. And it's really important to highlight that yet, right? Because we're just taking a snapshot. It's a really quick snapshot of where your child is today. It's not that they're never going to accomplish that skill. It's just that they're not there yet. And so it's really important to know that it could be that your child is doing all of these things, some of these skills, none of these skills. And that's just great because, again, each child is an individual and they develop at their own pace. And so we just want to make sure that we're checking in to see where we can support or what his strengths are so that we can celebrate these milestones as well, and then support where support is needed. Next, please. And, some of these questions in the questionnaire are things or activities or skills that maybe you've already seen, that you don't really have to think about too much because you see it every day. It's something that they're accomplishing. And so it might be really easy to just say, yes, 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 I see that, I see that. But there might be also some questions, some activities or some skills that you're not really sure if your child is doing that, right? There might be some questions where maybe you've never really tried to sit down and have your child use child safe scissors, right? And so you might not be sure if they are accomplishing that skill or if they have that skill present. And so we recommend that if you're not sure that your child is doing these skills or is able to do these skills, try it out, right? This is not a test. This is a questionnaire. And so we're not, we really want to make sure that we're looking at the whole of your child's development. And so, you can sit down and try it, make sure that it's, done in a playful way, it's a fun way, that we're trying it out, make it a game so that we can just, use those observations of, how children learn. Children learn through play. And so we want to make sure that we're making our observations of our child's development in that spirit of play. So we don't want you to sit down and quiz your child. We want you to try it out, make it a game, and practice these skills, right? So that's one of the great things about the ASQ3 is that it gives you some ideas of how to play and how to practice some skills with your children. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to go into detail just so that you guys have a general idea of what it is that we're looking for when we talk about development. What are those areas and what do they mean? And that way you have a general sense of, when your child is doing something, you can sort of already start to see it in a different way. So the 5 areas, developmental areas that the ASQ3 looks at is the first one is communication, which is not just what your child can say, but also what they can understand, right? So we're looking at, and a lot of it, especially at a young age, can be nonverbal, right? So children are understanding a lot more than they're able to speak at a young age. And so we're looking at, the different ways of these milestones in the way that they roll out through childhood. Next slide, please. We also look at gross motor, and gross motor are your child's big muscles in their trunk and their legs. So how they're using those big muscles in the trunk and their legs to start to roll over, to start to sit, to start to stand, to start to crawl, to walk, to jump, to run, to climb, right? So how are they using these big muscles and how they're learning to do all those things with those muscles, coordinating those big muscles in their trunk and their legs. Next slide, please. We also looked at fine motor, which are the smaller muscles in your child's wrist and fingers. And so how they're using these muscles to really start to manipulate a lot of things, right? Including utensils, but, toys, how they use those muscles to feed themselves, to dress themselves, right? It's these little muscles in their wrists and their fingers. That's what we're looking for in terms of fine motor abilities. Next slide, please. We also look at the area of problem solving. And this is the skills that your child develops while they're learning how to be in their environment. So how they learn, how they're solving problems, how they're learning through toys, how they play with toys, how they are in their environment. So a good example of problem solving is, if there's something that's a little bit out of reach, how do they access that, right? So there's a toy that's just a little bit higher than what they're able to reach. Will they pull a stool or a chair to stand so that they can reach that toy that they want, right? So they're learning how to solve problems in their environment with the things that they need. Next slide, please. And then the last area that we look at is personal social, which is really around self-help skills. So how your child is moving towards independence, right? How they're learning to do things for themselves, by themselves. So really getting their needs met. And that includes asking for help, right? So how they also are interacting with adults and other children when they need it. So how are they moving towards independence, learning to do things for themselves, by themselves. Next slide, please. So those are the 5 areas of development that the ASQ3 addresses. There's also a section on the ASQ3 that asks general questions about your child's health and maybe some other concerns, right? So we know that there are lots of things that can impact a child's development, and health is one of them. And so we also want to make sure that we're checking in about other things that could be impacting a child's health that don't necessarily fall into those 5 areas that we just talked about. So these are really broad, open-ended questions that talk a little bit about family history, your health history, the child's health history, and if there are already things that maybe you're a little bit concerned about, or you might have questions about your child's development, this is an area for you to address those and get answers about those concerns or questions that you might have about your child's development in this section. Next slide, please. So that's the ASQ3, right? So we look at those 5 areas of development, the motor and communication. But now we're going to focus on the next questionnaire, right? So I said that there was 2 questionnaires, the ASQ3. Now we're going to focus on the second questionnaire, which is the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, Social Emotional Second Edition, or the ASQ-SE. And when we talk about a child's development, we really like to think about the child in its whole development. But sometimes that's a lot of information for just one questionnaire. So we've separated them into two. So one questionnaire just focuses on motor and communication development. And then this questionnaire really focuses on social emotional. So social emotional development is something that is starting to get more traction. People are starting to learn and talk about a little bit more. And it's really important, especially in the first 5 years, because it really talks about a child's behavior and the way that they process emotions and feelings. And we know how important that is as well. And so this questionnaire really just focuses on those types of behaviors. Next slide, please. Next. So the social emotional development in young children is really about how children interact with other adults. So from a young age, from birth, children are taking in their all of the sensory things that are happening, and they're processing that, and that's informing how their brain develops in order to learn. So it takes these experiences of interactions with adults and caregivers, and the brain is expecting those experiences to really set some connections in your child's brain. So social emotional development is really tied to those interactions between you and your child. And so we really want to make sure that when we're thinking about a child's social emotional development, that we think about those interactions and how that's informing the way that your child is learning about the world and how their brain develops. Next, please. So we really want to make sure that when we're thinking about those interactions, that we try as much as possible to make them as positive, as loving, because that really is going to support your child's healthy social emotional development. We call these interactions, these positive and loving interactions, serve and return. So a serve is your child is asking for your attention. A return is you give it to them, right? And so as many of those serve and return interactions that are positive, that are loving, is really going to create some really good social emotional development, those really great synapses that fire in their brain so that they can process all of that sensory information in a way that is healthy and that serves their behavior and their emotions. Next slide, please. So it's really important that when we think about your child's social emotional development, that we get your experience as a parent, as a caregiver for this child. It's the most important foundation. And so we really want to make sure that when we're thinking about the questions that we ask, that we're taking into account your experience as a parent, as a caregiver around parenting this child, because sometimes it can be challenging as a family or as a caregiver to sometimes process some of those emotions for children. And so we really want to make sure that you're also getting the support that you need. And so there's questions on the ASQSE that really talk about how to what your experience is as a caregiver for this child. Next slide, please. So there are a few challenges when we're talking about social emotional development, and not just talking about it, but when we talk about how we might be able to learn more about your child's social emotional development. So really those observations about your child's behavior, or assessing, whether or not your child's social emotional development could use some support. There are a few things that are challenging about that. Next, please. So there are some behaviors that are just inherently challenging, regardless of how much we love our children, right? So babies, young infants, they cry a lot. They cry at times that are not always the most beneficial for us, right? They cry in the middle of the night. It is a behavior that can be a little bit challenging for us, but it's also part of their typical development. That is how babies start to learn communication skills, right? That's how they tell you when they're, tired, or when they're hungry, or when they're hurt. So even though it's a behavior that can be challenging, it's really an important part of their development. Next, please. We also know that toddlers, for example, 2 and 3-year-olds, we call them the terrible twos for a reason. We know that toddlers exhibit a lot of challenging behaviors, those tantrums, just that make no sense. For example, they need your help, they ask for your help, you help them, and then they just fall apart because it wasn't exactly the way that they wanted you to help, right? So we know that there are lots of behaviors in toddlers that can be very challenging. The tantrums, the whining, the clinging, again, very challenging behaviors, but also really a key part of their typical development. So those challenging behaviors, the tantrums, the pushing back, that's how children learn. That's how they learn some rules, right? They learn how to be able to set barriers for them and learn how to exist within those barriers. So pushing the barriers is something that we want them to do. We want them to challenge that. It can challenge us as caregivers, but it's part of their typical development. Next slide, please. Also preschoolers, right? Those 4 and 5-year-olds. There are also a lot of different challenging behaviors, right? So they fight a lot. They don't like to share. They have constant conflict, right? I think I read somewhere that children can exhibit at least 3 major conflicts in 1 hour, right? So they're just always in conflict. Again, those are really challenging behaviors for us, right? When a child doesn't want to share their toys after we've asked them to, or when they are fighting. I don't know if you guys saw this video, but there was this really great video of 2 children, one who said it's raining, and one who said it's sprinkling. And that conversation was at least a 3-minute conversation that was just sublime, but it was also, a lot of conflict. And so they can have some of these challenging behaviors, but again, some of these challenging or what we call antisocial behaviors can be part of that typical development. And so it can make it a little bit challenging when we're thinking about, should I be worried about this behavior? Is this something that I need to check in with somebody about? That can sometimes be hard to figure out whether or not this is a behavior that is part of their typical development, or is this something that I need more, that I have questions about and I need more information about. Next slide, please. So when we think about looking at our child's behavior in that way, we always want to make sure that we're passing that behavior through 3 very important lenses. So when we think about a behavior that's challenging, or that we might have questions about, or we might say, is this something that I should be worried about? We want to make sure that the first thing we do is ask ourselves, next please, is this behavior part of our child's typical developmental age or stage, right? So again, I talked a little bit about some of those behaviors for infants, for toddlers, for preschoolers, right? So we want to make sure that when we think about this behavior, we say, okay, is this something that should be happening because that's how they're learning to process some of these emotions? Or is this something that they should have already learned, and now it's a behavior that has surpassed their stage of development and is continuing on? So for example, tantrums, we can say, 2-year-olds are having lots of conflict at that age. And so they're having a lot of big feelings, and they're starting to learn how to deal with those. But tantrums are going to happen really frequently at 2, at 3. But once they start to learn, some better strategies around, talking about those feelings at 4 and at 5-year-olds, we should see tantrums decrease. And so we shouldn't be seeing we'll see some, but we shouldn't be seeing them the way that we did, as frequently as we did when they were 2 or 3 years old at 4 and 5. And so that's a way to say, okay, these tantrums continue to happen past the stage of when they should learn better strategies for getting their needs met. So that's one really important lens. Next, please. The next one is really around the context or the setting of that behavior. So, for example, is this a behavior that in this context or in this setting is pretty much okay, but then when you move that behavior to a different context or to a different setting, it then becomes a little bit challenging or becomes a little bit of a problem. For example, I always like to give the example of sharing. Some children in their home, at their house, they have all the toys that they need. Maybe they don't have to share them with their siblings because their siblings are older, or maybe each child has their own toys and they're not expected to share. So not sharing is a behavior that at home is perfectly fine because it's not expected of that child in that context or in that setting. So you take that same child and then you put him in a preschool setting where the expectation is that they're going to learn how to share all the toys and all of the playground, everything. So not sharing at home is not something that we are concerned about because they're not expected to share. But when we take that not sharing behavior and put it in preschool, then it becomes a little bit challenging and a little bit of a concern because that's a setting where they are expected to learn how to share. So that's just an example of passing that behavior through the lens of context or setting. Is this a behavior that is acceptable in one context or in one setting, but not in another? Next slide, please. And then the third lens that we should always think about too when we're thinking about our children's behavior is this a behavior that is acceptable because of our own family's values or cultures or expectations about behavior? And this one, can be a little bit hard to describe, but for example, looking at adults in the eyes, that is a behavior that in some families' values or cultures can be seen as defiant or as disrespectful, right? Some families' values or cultures say, you shouldn't look, a child this age shouldn't be looking at an adult directly in the eyes, right? It can be seen as disrespectful. And so, not looking at adults in the eyes in that family's values, it's part of the expected cultural piece of their family. And there might be a question on the ASQSE about looking adults in the eyes. So is this a behavior that, if it wasn't for this family's values or culture, would be seen as a little bit concerning? Maybe, but because it is, and because it's how children were taught to be, and again, we don't want to change anybody's family's values or cultures, but we just want to make sure that we're passing it through that lens so that we say, no, we shouldn't be worried because that's how that family's expectation of that behavior aligns with their own values and their own cultural expectations of that behavior. And so that's just a really quick way to say, it can be a little bit challenging to think about children's behaviors in their social emotional development in terms of, is this something that I need to be concerned about? All to say that the ASQSE is a really great way to start to narrow down some of those behaviors and trying to figure out, help us figure out a little bit better if this is something that we need more information on, or is this something that is not something that we should be worried about because of all of these different things, right? Behavior can be a little bit tricky to assess, but having a questionnaire like the ASQSE can be really helpful for us to get a better sense of where our children's strengths are and what our interactions can do to help support our child's social emotional development. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the features of the ASQSE, the same way that I did about the ASQ3. Next slide. or next bullet. Thank you. So when we look at the questionnaires side by side, they're going to look a little bit different, right? So I talked about those 5 areas of development that the ASQ3 looks at. The social emotional component, the ASQSE, doesn't have the questions broken up into those same areas. There are different things that we look for in social emotional development. And because of the way social emotional development rolls out in children, the questions don't necessarily all fall into, there isn't always going to be questions in each of the 7 different behavioral areas. So it's just going to look like a series of questions, but I do want to talk a little bit more about those behavioral areas because as we're thinking about our child's social emotional development, it's good to know what it is that we're looking for when we talk about social emotional development. Next, please. And the same, very similar to the ASQ3, when you read the questions on the ASQSE, you're going to look at the question and you're going to say, yes, this is a behavior that I see my child do too often or always, or this is a behavior that I sometimes see my child do, or this is a behavior that that I rarely or never see my child do, right? And the rarely or never is, you know, it allows for the behavior to be present, but it might be so rare that, you know, it only happens when, you know, my child is sick or when they're very grumpy, they haven't eaten, they haven't slept. I like to call them Disneyland days, right? So a child that has maybe had a lot of excitement, a lot of sugar, maybe we missed our nap, maybe we ate twice the amount of cake that we should have, right? We got cotton candy, but we also got a churro. And so by the time, you know, my little body has processed all of that excitement, I'm just done, right? And so I just have the biggest tantrum in the middle of Main Street and I cannot be moved. And so that behavior could be there, but it's so rare, right? I don't go to Disneyland every day. So that's why rarely is there, because it allows for that behavior to be present, but it's rare. Next, please. And so this is what I was also saying, is that those competencies that our children are learning and developing in their social emotional development are really formed through those interactions with their primary caregivers, with you as their parents. So it's really important for your participation when we're talking about your child's social emotional development. When we talk about how to support your child's social emotional development, you are, as a family, as a caregiver, as a parent, you are a key component. And so we really need your participation. And that's why these questionnaires are parent completed questionnaires. Both the ASQ3 and the ASQSE really need your participation. And that's why we ask you as a family or as a parent or as a caregiver to fill them out, because we really need your participation. You know your child best. You are your child's first teacher. And so we really want to make sure that we're asking you for the answers to these questions, because you know your child better than anybody. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about the different areas of social emotional development, we really want to, you know, a lot of this information you might not need, but it's good to have just so that you can start to think about how, you know, how your child is developing these things and how your interactions around these areas can help be a support to continue to support and promote your child's social emotional development. Because again, those competencies are really formed through those interactions. And so the first area that we look at is autonomy, which is your child's ability to self-initiate or to respond without guidance, right? So they're how they're learning to be independent. So again, when we think about all children birth to 5, because these questionnaires are also only for children birth to 5. When we think about children who are, you know, some maybe 6 months old, we're not really looking for a lot of autonomy at that age or that stage, right? So there's not going to be questions on the ASQSE about your 6-month-old's ability to self-initiate. So these are areas that will make more sense as your child rolls into that stage of their development. Next slide, please. Same with compliance. So compliance is your child's ability to follow directions or to follow rules or to conform to the directions of others, right? So again, thinking about young children, we don't really expect a 6-month-old to follow rules, right? But it is starting to at 2.5, we're really looking for your child's ability to start to follow some rules, to start to be able to take some direction. And so again, there's not going to be a lot of questions in the earlier questionnaires for young children around compliance, but you'll see a lot of them as they start to get, more into their toddler years or, older ages. Next slide, please. We also look at adaptive functioning. So this is your child's ability to really be able to cope with some of those physiological needs. So how they're able to sleep, how they're eating, how they're eliminating, toilet training, using diapers. Are they being safe? So a question in this area might look like, does your child sleep for at least 8 hours in a 24-hour period, right? So we're really looking to see, are they getting the rest that they need? Are they able to cope with all of those bodily functions? And are they being safe? Next slide, please. This is a big one. And I love this picture because it also sort of talks to some strategies around this one. So self-regulation is your child's ability or willingness to calm or settle down or adjust to those environmental conditions or a lot of stimulation. And, one of the things that I love is when a child, is maybe a little bit struggling with their self-regulation. They might be upset and they don't know what to do. Giving them bubbles is a really good way because it forces them to take deep breaths, right? You have to blow out the bubbles. And so that's a really good strategy for helping children calm down, where you don't just say calm down or take a deep breath, right? You say, here's some bubbles, blow me the biggest bubble you can find, so that they have to take that really deep breath. Because we know that taking deep breaths allows our nervous system to just start to settle down a little bit. So we really want to look at self-regulation and then think about some ways to how our interactions around helping a child settle down after they've had a lot of stimulation or in an environmental condition that might be a little bit too exciting for them. Next slide, please. Affect is also a really good one. Affect is your child's ability to demonstrate his or her own feelings and also the ability to show empathy for others. So can they identify that emotion that they're feeling, and can they identify it in others? So it's really great when children start to say, oh, I'm sad, or I'm mad, or I'm angry, and then giving them that language, letting them know that it's okay to share how they're feeling, and then also that it's okay for them to identify it in other people. So sometimes when children are starting to learn this, it's really as an adult, it's really great to name it for them. So you can ask, what is that you're feeling? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it frustration? I feel frustrated. Do you feel frustrated? I think really naming emotions can help, and especially in those interactions, can help get them to a place where they can start to, once you name it, you can tame it. So once they can name it, you can then provide some strategies for how to move past that emotion. Next slide, please. We also look at interaction, and interaction is your child's ability to respond or initiate responses to anybody, to parents, to teachers, to adults, to friends, their peers, younger children, right? So an example is, does your child respond to their own name, or do they talk or play with other adults that they know well. So that's interaction. Next slide, please. And then the last area of social emotional development that we're asking questions about is social communication. And social communication is really about your child's ability to interact with others, either verbally or non-verbally, around indicating their interests or needs. So really, how are they asking for what they need, right? Are they asking for it? Are they pointing to it? Do they show you things? Do they bring you their favorite toy and say, this is my favorite toy? Or when you ask them what their favorite color is, do they point to it? Do they tell you? So it's really about learning how to communicate socially with others, adults, children, peers, teachers. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna show you examples of one questionnaire so that you can just get a sense of what it looks like. Next, please. So this is the ASQ3. Next and next. So you can see how it's a little bit, it's broken up into those 5 areas that I talked about, right? Communication, you can see those 6 questions. You can see the overall section that has those open-ended questions that talk a little bit more about your child's health and other concerns that they might have. So this is just one example so that you can start to get a little bit familiar with the questionnaire. Next slide, please. And then this is the ASQ-SE. So this one you can see looks very similar, but it's a little bit different because it's not broken up into those 7 areas that we just talked about, but it's just a series of questions. And again, because of how social emotional development rolls out, right? So young children really don't have to be independent. They don't have to conform to rules or follow directions. So you're not going to see a series of questions. You're just going to, in those areas, you're just going to see a series of questions. And then there's also at the end of the ASQ-SE, 3 questions that just talk a little bit more about any concerns you may have in general. Next, please. So now we're going to talk about how you can get access to these questionnaires if you're interested. So I'm going to play a short video that talks a little bit about the Sparkler app, which we're partnering with Sparkler, Play for Parenting, to get all of our families in San Francisco access to these questionnaires if they're interested. So we're ready for the video.
Like every parent, I want what's best for my daughter. Sparkler helps me get her ready for learning and life. It all starts with knowing how she's developing. When I take the Ages and Stages questionnaire, the leading measure of child development, I get insights about my daughter's growth. With my permission, her pediatrician and teachers can see her progress too. When we're on the same page, I have more support to help my daughter thrive. Sparkler creates a personalized playbook for my daughter based on her progress and passions. It's full of playful and powerful ideas, inspired by the latest research on how young brains develop and aligned with learning standards. Everything in Sparkler focuses on 4 major areas of development. Heart, how you approach the world. Mind, how you think. Body, how you grow and move. Words, how you communicate. When I choose a card, I see a few steps giving me an idea of what to do. A quick and simple recipe for play. Then I put my phone down so we can play together. Once we're done, I add a photo to my scrapbook and send feedback on how it went. It's easy to follow our progress and to find ideas for what to do next to keep her growing and learning. Sparkler helps me understand the science of early brain and child development through just-in-time tips just for me, and a coach who gives me ways to support my daughter's growth. Raising a small child is a big job. Sparkler is a powerful partner in the palm of my hand.
Next, please. Next. So the Sparkler app is available for download for free in all the places that you find your apps, right? So if you have an iOS system, you can find it in your app store, in your Apple App Store. And this is what it looks like, the Sparkler Play for Parenting. Next. And if you have an Android system, you can find it in the Google Play Store. Also, it's called Sparkler Play for Parenting. So once you download that, next slide, please. You would need to register for an account. Next. So you would download the app, you would create a new account. Next. You are going to be asked to enter a code, and this code really just connects you to us at Help Me Grow, so that we know who is participating in our pilot. And this is the code that you would need. 1878. So you enter that code. Next, you put in all of your information, your name, your email, you create a password. This is optional. You don't have to give it to us, but if you want, you can enter your address, your phone number, your zip. Next slide, please. And then you would choose which group you're going to be, which is, for us, it's family. So you would choose that you are a family, and that way you would get access to both the ASQ and the ASQSE so that you can start answering those questions, so you can start learning more about your child's communication and motor development and social emotional development, so that we can start to really learn how your child is growing and how we can continue to provide a lot of really rich play interactions so that they can continue to meet those milestones at the next age and stage. Next, please. And then the app is also a really great tool just for your parenting. So next. So once you start to fill out the questionnaires, you're going to get the ability to celebrate those milestones, know your child's strengths, and where they might benefit from some more practice or support. Next. So those results are going to get sent to us at Help Me Grow. But then you're also going to be able to learn more about how to play with your child. So there's a lot of great cards in there. They're called cards that give you some ideas for playing, right? So young children, that's how they learn. They learn through play. They don't learn by memorization or by sitting down with a test, right? They're learning by how they manipulate the world. And so the Sparkler app gives you a lot of ideas to continue to play with your child and try out these activities. Next slide, please. And you can continue to track your child's milestones so that we can see how they were when you first started. And then again, because children are constantly learning and they're constantly developing, we can continue to see how they're growing, right? So you can have your scrapbook, so you can take pictures of when they first accomplished something. And that way you can look back and think, wow, look at how far they've come. Next. And then it also provides some coaching. So if there are concerns, right, maybe your child might be missing some milestones and you just have a few questions or maybe some concerns, that's where we at Help Me Grow can come in and get you some tips or advice or some more community-based resources that might help support whatever concern you may have about your child's development. So there's a two-way conversation that can happen, always with your permission first. If you're fine just how you are and you just want the questionnaire, the Sparklers, it's almost a standalone, but there is that collaboration with us at Help Me Grow, so that you can get support if and when you need it. Next slide, please. And I know we're coming up kind of close. So this is who we are, a little bit of information for what we do at Help Me Grow. So we have care coordination supports that can help your family with any sort of concerns you may have about your child's developments, with referrals and connections to other community supports. We also do more trainings for families and also childcare educators or early childhood preschool teachers or family child care providers. And then we also provide supports on the ASQ and the ASQSC. So if you have questions about that, you can also get in touch with me. Next slide. And I think that's it. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions if there are any in the chat. Hi, Marisela.
Hi. So first of all, thank you, Sulema, for such a wonderful presentation to learn a little bit more about child development, reaching out to parents who might be listening and just wondering about their own children and where they are in their ages and stages, so that they can see that there is a tool for them to use and to really be able to think about, is this something to be concerned about or is it not? It's just a lot of times, I think, especially if you're a first-time parent, there's a lot of worry that happens just naturally. But, I think that having support and having a great agency such as yours that really is there for the parents and families who might have these questions. So thank you very much. We invite that you put any questions that you might have in the chat so that we can ask Sulema while we have her. And while we wait for questions, can you, Sulema, remind us of the code again for Sparkler for parents to access it for free?
For free, the code is 1878. And I believe also you're putting in the chat some handouts. So even if you forget or you wrote it down and then, whatever happened, you lost that piece of paper. I do that all the time. There is a link to a handout that gives you all of the information that I just presented in those last 3 slides. So it talks about, the drop-down menu, the code, and all of the great resources that the app provides. Unfortunately, however, it's only for San Francisco families. So that's a really key thing that we should have said, because the Sparkler app is connected to Help Me Grow. We are a San Francisco-based organization, and we can only really support in San Francisco. So if you live or work and your child comes to school in San Francisco, feel free to download that app.
Wonderful. So San Francisco families who might be tuning in, or those of you who have heard the information and would like to share this presentation with other colleagues or friends or parents, please let them know that this presentation is useful to at least learn about what is the Ages and Stages questionnaire. And if you are in San Francisco, you are able to access the Sparkler app for free using the information that Sulema provided today. The links are in the chat, and like she said, you can go to the your app store or your app source and download the Sparkler app. And if you're in San Francisco, you could use that code, and support is provided through Support for Families. What if people want to get in touch with Support for Families, Sulema? What's the best way?
Yeah, so Support for Families is the larger organization that Help Me Grow lives in, and we are a family resource center who is still operating even through this pandemic. So we don't do any more face-to-face appointments right now, but we are still taking phone calls or WhatsApp messages. So the best way is really to call us. There's a warm line, and the number is 415-920-5040, and that will connect you to either directly as support, or we'll get you connected as soon as possible to somebody who can support your questions or answer your questions or concerns about your child's development. You can also email us, either or works. So there's somebody who's gonna answer emails and also the phone.
Wonderful. We also put that in the chat as well, the how to get in touch with the larger organization Support for Families, which Help Me Grow is part of. I don't see any. Oh, let's see. We do have a question that popped up. So we have a expecting parent. Their baby's going to come in January. They want to know if they can sign up then.
Yes, congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
That's so exciting. Yes, the questionnaire starts as young as 1 month. So January, you can sign up, and then February, you start taking that questionnaire.
Yeah, so
and that's
really
that. Yeah, welcome to the world, little baby. We're so excited you're here.
Yes, we're definitely excited. Thank you so much for that question. That's a wonderful question. So, it's this ASQ and Sparkler app is great for, just you can get them started on the right foot. And I feel like I have to add in here that you can also get that baby a library card. We would love to have another library user. We have one more question that is about, can more than one parent have the app installed on their phone? Is that possible?
I believe so. I think I think there's a couple of different ways to do that. So you can each have your own account, right? So if you want to, especially with the social emotional questionnaire, children are so different, at different times and with different people. So if you want your own account, you can have your own account so that you can answer those questions based on your own observations. It's always really great to have more information. Or if you don't want to do the questionnaire multiple times, one person does one set. If you just want access to I believe they're called play cards. So if you just want access to the activities, I think you can download it and then use the same login information as the person who created the account.
Great. So we can have both parents being active participants in following their child's development. So that's really wonderful to hear. Well, I don't see any more questions popping up, but again, if anybody has questions, it's never too late to ask. You can get in touch with Help Me Grow or Support for Families, and they will happily help you to connect. Sulema, is there anything last word you'd like to offer parents who might be listening? They might not be listening right now, but they'll listen to this recording. Again, the recording will be available for anybody who wants to repeat it or share it with friends or colleagues.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you if you are watching at whatever time, but I also want you to take some time for yourself, right? So especially now with this pandemic, we know how challenging parenting is. We know that it's unexpected and it's way out of the ordinary. So as a parent, give yourself a break. Make sure that you're also taking time for yourself. Self-care is so important. We always say, to heed the advice of air stewardesses or airline people where, they say, put your own mask on first before putting somebody else's mask. So really take care of yourselves, because the more that you are ready and prepared to be a parent, especially those interactions, the better your children are going to be able to respond to stressors that are happening almost on a daily basis. So just really take care of yourselves.
Yes, that's wonderful advice, parents out there who are listening. You guys are doing a great job.
Yes. Yeah.
Great job.
Yeah.
Again, thank you everyone for listening, and share this link with other parents who might be interested in knowing this information. And thank you everyone who was here listening live, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lisa.